all for joining us in this edition of Business Today. It's the 22nd of April 2016. My name is Joy Doreen Bira, and we are coming to you live from the headquarters of the Kenya Wildlife Service here in Nairobi. And remember, today we are focusing on wildlife tourism and the Ivory burning event that is meant to be happening at the end of this month. That's going to be on the 30th of April 2016. We were going to be having 8 heads of state and, of course, global celebrities and conservationists who are going to be taking part in that event. Very big event. I think it's going to be the biggest burn of ivory stockpiles in Kenya's history, where we're going to be seeing about 150 tons of elephant tusks, or ivory tusks in this case, and also 1.35 tons of rhino horn that are going to be destroyed on that day. It's going to be a big event. But at the end of it all, we are asking the question, how would you rate Kenya's efforts in the fight against poaching? And remember, you can take part in our Twitter poll. If you go to my Twitter handle at Joy Doreen Bira, you will be able to take part. Has it been very successful, fairly successful, or ineffective? You can take part in that Twitter poll, and at the end of the show we're going to be looking at some of the results and also some of the reasons as to why you think that Twitter poll is the way it is in regard to the respondings. Now, on my panel this afternoon, I have Paul Mbugua, who is the Assistant Director for Marketing at the Kenya Wildlife Service, and we also have Paul Gathitu, who is the spokesperson at the Kenya Wildlife Service. They're going to talk to us about this upcoming event, but also about the economic value of wildlife tourism in Kenya today. So we are going to start by taking a look at one of the stories about Kenya's hospitality and just how much of a role it plays in attracting tourism numbers into the country.
With an annual housing demand pegged at 200,000 units per year, developers have been on the go, working fast to provide decent and affordable housing.
There could hardly be a more important matter than provision of decent housing in Kenya. As a country, we're still very far from attaining the Vision 2030 target of 200,000 units annually. But I wish to emphasize, all is not gloom.
Most of the units are highly priced, thus limiting the uptake for a majority of working Kenyans.
63% of the county population lives in urban centers. The manifestation of Kiambu urbanization is in 10 major towns, 5 of which have populations ranging from 100 to 300,000 people. This means we need to plan for decent and quality urban livelihoods.
On average, property costs have stayed high owing to the cost of construction, cost of land, as well as the cost of credit. With less than 20,000 mortgages in the market, this goes to show the limitless potential the real estate market holds.
We've seen bungalows that used to lie in large spaces of land now being redeveloped to take advantage of that emerging middle class, which is now demanding apartments more than the demand for bungalows that has been the dominant feature in the market previously. So the characteristics of the market is such that we are seeing the middle class being the key driver, and apartments being prominently the preferred type of houses.
Migration to urban centers has spiked, placing intense pressure for houses in most cities and towns in the country. Among developers keen to cash in on the housing deficit is investments firm Saiton.
Firstly, what you have here in Kiambu, obviously you have a good governance that has a sustainable vision. And for real estate investment, that's the key. So thus, things are going the right way.
I'd like to mention that your decision to bring the Alma on this site is well grounded in many respects. The landscape of Waka will have a new prime development in whose wake more opportunities for employment and decent homes will be created.
When you drive here, you see the UN, you pass the village market, then you get the few wows at the Two Rivers development. Then you pass the Eastern Bypass, and then you arrive at the Alma. And Alma, mark my words, will be one of the big landmarks here.
Rent for a bulk of Kenyans consumes close to 40% of one's income, with food taking up at least 30%.
At some point, the market must correct. The market must respond to demand. If demand is in that middle segment, then it simply means that the developers who are now on the supply side will start to adjust to fill the gap that exists where the demand is. And the demand clearly from our index is in the middle segment. And we'll probably see less of development in that area as opposed to the apartments.
According to the United Nations, by 2020, Kenya's population is estimated to stand at 60 million plus. Interestingly, developers have not only cast their eyes on residential units, but there is growing interest in tapping into the hospitality sector, which has remained quite resilient despite the heightened volatility.
Well, one of the sectors that has been registering stellar performance in Kenya's industry is the hospitality sector.
Investment is forecasted to be around 70 billion. I think we all agree that we would like to, as the project developer, which is not Swiss International, but of course Mount Kenya Holiday Homes, that they are expecting minimum investments, return on investments of, I would say, 20% at the minimum.
The entry of foreign-based conglomerate Swiss International Hotels and Resorts signals the increasing appetite in the hospitality sector, which has been attracting global brands as Kenya continues to become a top destination for meetings and conferences.
Groundbreaking has happened. The golf course is almost finished. There are 9 villas under construction, of which I believe 2 or 3 are ready. Some of the villas have been sold as well, and we're now going to the second phase of the townhouses, the apartments, the hotel itself, the convention center or meeting center.
Although Kenya has massive untapped potential in its property market, the cost factor remains a major barrier for millions of Kenyans to transition into home ownership. Abiagina, KTN News for Transformers.
Thanks a lot, Abby. And of course, now talking about tourism numbers, airlines around the East African region are trying their level best to give or offer services to East Africans at a very low cost. And one of the airlines that has joined the aviation industry in the East African region is Fastjet, that are offering low budget flights to passengers across the East African region. I happen to have spoken to the general manager of Fastjet Tanzania, and his reasons for introducing low budget flights on the East African region are actually partly because he wanted to ensure that the growing business class across the region is able to afford air transport.
Of increased airlines plying the East African skies, low-cost carrier Fastjet identified its niche, the low-cost traveler. The airline chose Dar es Salaam, Tanzania as its first operating base in Africa, with flights from Julius Nyerere International Airport commencing on the 29th of November 2012, sparking a ticket pricing war in the region with relatively cheaper fares.
So far, we have increased up to 4 aircraft now, plying as far south as Joburg and as far north as Nairobi and as far west as Entebbe.
Initially, flights operated successfully between Dar es Salaam and Kilimanjaro and between Dar es Salaam and Mwanza, but the Airbus flying airline has now added to its destinations the Dar es Salaam-Nairobi route to leverage on the increased business transactions by the rising middle class. The 1-hour flight offers fares exclusive of taxes.
If you were to review the accounts of our major investor, which is Fastjet PLC, on the London Stock Exchange, you'll see that so far we've not yet made a profit. But we're hoping to break even this year.
After winning Africa's leading low-cost airline award at the 23rd Annual World Travel Awards held in Zanzibar, the British low-cost airline could see a crystal ball soon with its low-budget flights identity. Joy Doreen Bira, KTN News.
All right, and we are live at the Kenya Wildlife Service headquarters here in Nairobi, where we have the Nairobi National Park, the only national park in the capital city around the world, and it has the big the big four of the big five animals around the national park. So with me on my panel, I have Paul Mbugua, who is the Assistant Director for Marketing at the Kenya Wildlife Service. At my immediate left and my extreme left, I have Paul Gathitu, who is the spokesperson for Kenya Wildlife Service. Thank you both for joining us once again on the show. I will start by speaking to Paul Gathitu. We have a big event, in fact, the biggest ever ivory banning event in the country, in Kenya's history. What exactly does this mean for the country?
For Kenya, I think it's very important. It's in keeping with the tradition that was seen in 1989 when the first president banned 12 tons of ivory. But it's part of our conservation agenda, and this is the reason why this becomes very important, because the inclusion of everybody, from all the communities to all the staff of KWS to all the people of Kenya to the head of state, everybody is involved in this conservation effort. And therefore, that's the reason why preparations are at top gear to be able to see that this event becomes one of the best shots that we've ever taken in terms of conservation, and that will be happening next Saturday.
All right. So the message that is being put across is more about, it's not about the intrinsic value. The message that is being put across is that there is no intrinsic value for ivory except for the elephants themselves. But what is it that as Kenyans we need to understand about preserving heritage?
I think our wildlife truly is a very strong mark and a strong selling point. If you traveled across the world, the first thing, if you said you are Kenyan, would be asked, are you an athlete? Do you know Paul Tergat? And the second one would be, what about your wildlife that we saw on this channel or that channel? So wildlife and athletes are some of the best selling points for the country. We do know that we are leaders in many other areas, but at least those two stand out. And wildlife is a very endearing resource. It's an area that really makes people want to come out. And that's part of the reason why, even though we know we conserve for posterity, we don't really have to do it for business, but we know that it has a big play in terms of looking at the connection with tourism.
All right. Mr. Paul Mbugua, let me come to you now. Wildlife, as we know it, has got a very big economic value. But for people who do not really understand the economic value of wildlife tourism, what would you say to them?
Tourism is a very important sector to the country. It contributes approximately 14% of the GDP. In addition to that, it is a sector that has a multiplier effect on several other sectors. The other sectors, for example, include ground transport, air transport, floriculture, horticulture. All those benefit from tourism. So when tourism is booming, those other sectors are booming, and not forgetting the hospitality industry. Considering our position as a country, we need to put more value on more emphasis on supporting tourism, because if you look at tourism, it is one of the sectors, one of the very few sectors that has the potential for generating employment in the country than perhaps the others, simply because in tourism a lot of activities are labor intensive. They cannot be mechanized. You cannot automate tourism. If a tourist has to move from destination A to destination B, a driver is employed. In the hospitality industry, a given number of rooms in a hotel or a lodge, a job is created for an attendant. So it's actually a sector that we need to put a lot of more emphasis, and we have to compete, because globally, tourism is a sector that pits countries against each other. We are all competing for the tourists.
Okay.
We are all competing for the tourists. Some of them could be passing there.
Yes.
And we need to ensure that we up our games, because if we slacken, of course, the competition can also do you in. So, but I dare say here that the country is putting a lot more effort in marketing the country as a destination of choice.
All right. And speaking of marketing the country, Mr. Gadhitu, on the 30th, we are going to be seeing a number of dignitaries coming into the country. There are about 8 heads of state. Who are these 8 heads of state, the global celebrities and the conservationists that are coming from around the world?
Perhaps in answering that question, I may need to just clarify that there are 2 events that are happening back to back. One of them is the Giants Club Summit, of which our head of state is a founding member, and they're holding their summit for the first time.
Yeah.
So that is the one that would probably be having a lot of these celebrities, and of course also inviting a lot of presidents, because they are aimed at looking at conservation. And therefore plans are at an advanced stage, but it would be the state office that would be better placed to be able to say exactly who is coming, and particularly those celebrities that are coming. But at the tail end of it, which is now the ban, that one we are in the ones who are running that particular event. And that is the reason why we would like to show that they are running back to back. They are hosted by the same person, but they are different events. So the one that we would talk about would be the one for the ban. And starting next week, we'll be rolling out now the full details of it, to who exactly is invited, what the program will be, what activities will happen. So we're just rolling it out, and beginning Monday, you'll begin to see more information coming, the details of which I will be able to share.
All right. So we're looking at 150 tons of ivory tusks and 1.35 tons of rhino horn. But where exactly are they coming from? Are they coming from transit areas, transit airports, and the Mombasa port? Which parts of the country are they from?
Yeah, first let's just correct that figure. It's 105 that will be banned.
Tons.
105. The total, remember, when we did the inventory was 137.6 or so. So the 105 are the ones now that are coming from different backgrounds. So the details will be given as to the actual breakdown of which ivory is Kenya, which one is coming from as a result of poaching, as a result of natural deaths. So all these details will be given going forward. But it does incorporate all the ivory in the country that was inventoried, whether it was on transit, whether it was from our own stores. And we're going back to 1989, probably even slightly more before than that. And it's going to incorporate, including even the amnesty that was just recently declared. So all the ivory that we have that has been inventoried will be put on that area, except for what has been set aside, and we have explained this. But the actual breakdown will be given next week.
All right. Mr. Mbugua, when you look at the numbers of our wildlife, especially elephants and rhinos, the numbers have been depleting over the years. I think we could say between the 1960s and 1990, we could have lost nearly more than half of the elephant population that ever existed for centuries time back. For instance, we seem to only have 35,000 elephants in the country today. But what does this say about Kenya as a country that still, up until today, has one of the biggest populations of elephants?
To put some numbers, some figures to that question, in 1969-1970, we had approximately 167,000 elephants in the country. Prior to formation of Kenya Wildlife Service in 1989, we had the population had dropped to a paltry 16,000. And now, following the conservation efforts done by Kenya Wildlife Service, and of course the other conservation agencies and the Kenyans at large, the support they have given, those efforts have contributed to building the numbers to the current 35,000. And we are very proud to say that we are one of the few countries that have managed to do that. Other countries appears to be tottering, to be losing, perhaps almost losing the game to the poachers. For example, over the past 2 years, Kenya as a country, we have actually lost very few elephants over the past 2 years. And the numbers we are losing to poaching is actually going down. However, the countries in the elephant, some countries in the elephant range states are actually losing the game. They are experiencing more and more poaching. And of course, we keep on saying that it's just a matter of time. And if nothing happens, if the world does not come together, we may actually see the elephants becoming extinct during our lifetime. And that is a tragedy. We need to work very hard, and as a country, we need to encourage our countrymen, first of all, to value the elephants we have. It is our heritage. God was, in his wisdom, found it fit to keep the elephants here, not any other place, because he knew it is us who can take care of them. It is us who can coexist with them, and we have been doing that pretty well in spite of a few ups and downs here and there. So we are doing well, and I think as a country we need to raise our heads up.
Okay. Now, this is a question I'm going to pose to the both of you, and that is in regard to the numbers and how much revenue we are getting out of wildlife. Say, the past 3 years, we've seen, the tourism numbers going down for reasons we probably could not have prevented, and that is the issue of Ebola that happened just 2 years ago, and that, of course, affected the tourism numbers around. But how much revenue does wildlife tourism bring into Kenya?
When talking of revenue coming through tourism, I may only be able to talk about revenue coming to Kenya Wildlife Service. Remember, the sector all wildlife is not in under Kenya Wildlife Service. There are conservancies, group ranches, and all of them attract tourists. And they have the numbers of tourists visiting their facilities have been increasing with the time. And this is good for us, especially as Kenya Wildlife Service, because sometimes in the 90s, it became apparent to us that we cannot conserve on our own. We need the other people to help us to do conservation. And we also wanted them to know that conservation is not a monopoly of Kenya Wildlife Service. We wanted them to engage in conservation efforts, start conservancies, start group ranches, so that they can also attract tourists and benefit from tourism. Those efforts appears to be bearing fruit, because right now we could be sharing visitor numbers, visiting tourist facilities, especially wildlife related. We could be sharing 50 by 50 with the conservancies. Talking of the revenue coming to the numbers coming to Kenya Wildlife Service, for example. We have seen the numbers decline over the past 3 years. For example, in 2011, 2012, we had approximately 2.3 million visitors visiting our parks. The following year, we had 2 million. And 2014, 2015, we had approximately 1.7 million visiting our parks. That is not our target. We need to build the numbers.
What is the target?
Higher numbers.
Okay.
But it is not lost on us that tourism is extremely sensitive to so many factors. And one of the factors that has been affecting us is, number one, advisories, negative advisories, where several countries from the source markets, especially European and America, advise their citizens not to visit particular areas, not even to visit the country is very dangerous. But I'm surprised, whereas they give those advisories, their embassies are still here and their staff are still here and they are not going away, which is a contradiction, because if there is total insecurity, I do not expect to see them around. So, but this is changing with the current efforts being done by the cabinet secretary in charge of tourism. We have seen, and plus our president, we have seen a reversal of some of these advisories. The other factor that contributes to negative visitation is insecurity. And we are in an area whereby, number one, you can choose your friend, but you cannot choose your neighbor. So we are where we are, and we cannot change the neighbors we have. Some of them, like Somalia, very volatile.
Yeah.
A lot of insecurity associated with that country. A lot of terrorism activities. But I am very positive that as a country we can overturn this.
All right.
Because if you look at other countries, and I'll give an example of Jordan. Jordan is in a very volatile area, surrounded by countries that are, there are bombs all over the place, almost all the time.
Yes.
And yet Jordan records about approximately 5 million tourists in a year, which is slightly higher than what Kenya receives.
But does this mean that we are paying too much attention to maybe specific areas of tourism and neglecting some of them? Because what would explain a country like Jordan's tourist numbers that are so high up there, coming to about 5 million tourists every year, as opposed to our numbers? Yet we probably seem to be much more peaceful or much more stable compared to these other countries.
Maybe we have not beaten our drums loud enough. But we need the world to know what we have. And we are also trying to diversify. The hospitality industry is growing tremendously.
Right.
We have hotels and lodges that can compete with the best anywhere in the world.
All right.
So we are not behind along that line.
Okay.
But,
let me bring in Mr. Gadhitu. There are a number of challenges Kenya Wildlife Service does experience, all factors constant. But then again, maybe the pace at which some of these challenges are being dealt with could be a much slower pace than you would have loved it to be. But what are the standout challenges you experience as a wildlife service?
I think we look at this conservation area. It's an area that is very intricate and is very challenging. I don't think there is any state in the world that can actually say that wildlife can be conserved through tourism alone. So there is a question of, like, if you took the football analogy, where you have to protect or goalkeep as well as strike. So it means that it has to be on both sides. And these challenges, that come with, say, poaching, we've seen it evolve, moving from the rudimental, where, we'd see people coming in and just looking for food, to actually commercializing, so that you're now talking about bushmeat and they want to take it. They move from moving it in meat labeled vans to just riding on bicycles. And if you meet somebody riding a bicycle with a little gunny bag, you're not likely to think very much of them. But if they are about 10 bicycles doing that regular transit of 20 kilos every half hour or so, then that can become a big problem. So they've become complicated by being rudimental, so that's a challenge. We are also seeing, in terms of poaching itself, that they've changed. So instead of just going to the traditional routes that we used to know, now we start hearing of poaching in places like Narok. It was not historically a hotspot, for poaching. We start seeing the methods that they're using, that initially probably they were using guns, and they realized that is loud, it's going to be hard.
Right.
So they use silent means. So it's a question of them trying to evolve, to try and keep away from us. If it's transiting, there's a lot of deception, so that they have false compartments in vehicles. They make false declarations if they are trying to transport. They put it on their body, if it's necklaces, made of ivory. So there's a lot of deceit in terms of the way that they are using. So, but we are catching up with all this because we have employed quite a number of things. First of all, as you will all know, we increased the number of rangers, which means that every square kilometer is covered a little better. We are also working with government interagencies. So wildlife crime has actually now been elevated to be something that all the security agencies will be looking out for. So if you're waiting for KWS to not to catch you because you're at the airport, Kenya Airports Authority, the Customs Service, all of them will be on the lookout. So it's been elevated. We also have a lot of inter-regional and international cooperation. So whether it's Interpol or Lusaka Agreement Task Force, or whether it's CITES, we are seeing much more collaboration in that particular area. And I think elevating it and saying that we do not want to see any transiting happening here. We do not want to see any poaching happening here. That is a very strong point. The last one is about communities, because a lot of our wildlife is outside the protected areas, and that means that if we do not have communities on our side, we truly stand to lose. And the law now has actually recognized them and embedded them in law, to the point that actually communities are represented on the board of trustees of Kenya Wildlife Service. And then in the counties, they are the ones that are leading. They have the chairman of that county conservation and compensation committee, who is actually put there through a competitive process for each of the counties. And they went and they competed, they applied for the jobs, they were interviewed, shortlisted, the works. Then there's 4 other community representatives, to make a total of 5, who are then brought into office through an elective process. And I don't think there is any other country that would have brought the communities as close as we have done in terms of now getting their support.
All right.
And that means that they're able to work directly.
So we're going to take a short break, but remember, according to the targets for the tourism ministry, they expect at least the tourist numbers to shoot up to about 3 million by the year 2018. Is this being too ambitious, or are we even underestimating our abilities as a country to raise these numbers? We're going to delve deeper into the Lusaka Agreement Task Force and whether or not it has been able to achieve what it was meant to achieve in the first place. We'll take a short break and we'll be back. We'll also take a look at some of the stockpiles. We're expecting more trucks to be coming through with more ivory tusks and rhino horn, but we'll be able to take a look at some of those that have so far arrived. You're watching Business Today here on KTN News. Let's take that break. We'll be back.